one of the things that I tell a lot of my coaching students is that you can't solve today's problems and issues with yesterday's solutions. But so many church musicians still do this. They like to stay the same. They don't like to change. There are 10 traps that church musicians are falling into that's causing major issues. Everything from poor performances during church services to stagnation and lack of growth, and even strained personal relationships outside church. And until these things are corrected, church musicians are going to be even more frustrated and even more burned out than ever before. So in this video, I'm going to tell you about the top 10 traps that church musicians are falling into and that's causing a lot of headaches, and show you exactly how to deal with it. So a few months ago, I was playing for a funeral, and the person that passed away was a well-known musician in the city, and it attracted a lot of other singers and musicians there to that funeral. I was the lead musician there in charge of doing everything, but when all of the other musicians showed up, it turned into a fiasco. They all started doing that thing where they were looking at each other and judging each other and all that. And the ones that were on program could not wait to get up and get on the instruments and do their turn or do their thing. They got on the instruments and started playing like super loud and overplaying the soloists and all of that just to get the other musicians in the room to sort of notice them. And what I've learned from all of that kind of stuff is that there's this like really deep-seated insecurity that a lot of musicians have that's causing them so much strife and headache. And when it's not put in check, it makes no one want to be around them. And that makes them fall into this trap of trying to prove yourself. And so how do you avoid and deal with this trap? Well, it's 3 things that you do. The first is you practice humility. You learn to be humble around others. The other one is that you practice a growth mindset. So think about how you can grow in situations like that. And then you also focus on self-acceptance, because a lot of times it's about you not really accepting your own self and accepting your own abilities. Now, following right after that trap, one of the things that us church musicians really need to realize is that we are a part of a team and we're not the star of the show. And what that means is that we are a part of a conversation that's happening between all of the instruments, the singers and the vocalists and all of that. So you can't just overshadow the rest of the team and the instruments and the vocalists and try to say what you want to say musically. The problem is that a lot of musicians are watching these social media, YouTube videos and all of that, and they see all of these musicians doing these fancy riffs and licks and chops and all of that as a featured artist. And they forget or they don't understand that that's not how you play or perform when you're performing with a team. So just like in a real conversation, we have to listen just as much or even more than we talk. And when musicians don't learn to balance this in a mature manner, they fall into this next biggest trap, which is one that I alluded to earlier, which is overplaying. So the way that you fix this is you start by leaving space for listening for what the other musicians and singers will put in that space, and then maybe you can react to it. But this next trap is a really big reason why a lot of musicians overplay. So you know how sometimes you want to take a song and sort of spruce it up a bit, like add your own riffs and licks and chops and all of that to the song, right? And when a full band does this together, it can make a song a lot more interesting. But so many church musicians take this way too far, so much so that the song almost becomes unrecognizable. And they forget about the power of simplicity, and they fall into this trap of overcomplicating the music arrangements. And when this happens, not only are the individual musicians forced to overplay, like I mentioned earlier, but really the entire band is sort of overplaying. So the way that you fix this is you focus on the simplicity of the arrangements and focus on the core elements of the song, and only add this really complex stuff when it truly serves the song, and ultimately, it creates a better experience for the audience. Okay, so I used to play for this church where they had some sort of service going on almost every day or every night of the week. And all of the ministers and church leaders and all of that would be there for all of the services. And what would get me is that all of these ministers and leaders had wives or husbands and had kids that I had never met before. Like, I had been playing for this church for like over 2 years, and I hadn't even met the pastor's wife before. Well, it turns out that a lot of these church leaders that I'm talking about had dysfunctional families because the church leaders were at church all of the time. So they missed things like the kids' graduations and, special events and their spouses' anniversaries and all of that. So it made it really bad. And that's why this trap of neglecting your family and friends for church will land you in some serious issues, especially in the long term. So the way that you deal with this is you set boundaries to make sure your church responsibilities don't interfere with your personal life and your personal responsibilities to things like your family and your friends. It's all about balance. Now, let's be honest about something. We all want raises from our church jobs, right? And it's understandable with the price of everything going up, from gas and food to even streaming services. That extra $50, $75, $125 would do us some real good, right? But the fact of the matter is, a lot of church musicians are out here mad and upset because they aren't getting raises, but at the same time, they're showing up late for services and rehearsals and all that. They're showing up unprepared, and they're just being overall unprofessional. And that causes a lot of church musicians to fall into this really big trap of thinking that they deserve more money and asking for more money without earning it. And the way that you fix that is you focus on yourself and improving your skills and improving the contributions that you bring to the church. That way, when you ask for a raise, you have something to bring to the table, and that raise you're asking for is justified. Which brings me to this. You ever see those church musicians who always have like their phone up to their ear and listening to music right before service or right before rehearsal? They're usually trying to listen to and learn a song because they failed to practice it or go over it before the service or before the rehearsal, right? Nothing grinds my gears more than musicians who show up to a rehearsal and not know a single lick of the music we're supposed to be going over. It makes all of the other musicians feel like we've just wasted our time because now we got to wait for you to learn the song. And it's really crazy how so many church musicians have fallen into this trap of lack of preparation. It's something that really needs to be fixed. And the way that you do this is you simply take the time to start practicing and going over the music before you get to the rehearsal, before you get to the service, so that you know it and you're not putting everybody else in jeopardy or wasting everybody else's time. All right, stick with me here because these next ones are super important. So, those musicians who always responds to text messages super late, or when you call them and you leave a message or something and they don't call you back until a day or two later. This is something that so many church musicians and just musicians overall do these days that it almost feels like it's supposed to be the norm or something. But it's not. I know we all have stuff to do these days and everybody's super busy. But the fact of the matter is, when you do this, you're holding up things for other musicians and the people who are trying to reach out to you. And not only that, the way that musicians tend to respond is very unclear and unfocused and all of that, whether it be the MD or the director or whatever responding to this stuff. It causes so much confusion and so many misunderstandings amongst the team that you're dealing with. And that's how so many church musicians fall into this trap of poor communication. And the way you fix that is easy. You start responding to phone calls, texts, and emails and all of that in a timely fashion, and make sure you're crystal clear about the things that you say. Now, you know that saying that says it only takes one apple to spoil a bunch? Well, nothing spoils or outright damages a team of people and musicians like negative people. People who are always pessimistic and talking down and bad about things and about people. They're always the ones that are blaming other people and all of that. And they tend to have this really arrogant and narcissistic behavior. And because of this, the morale of the entire music department is down and everyone's frustrated and nobody likes working with that person or with those people. And it just makes things overall more difficult. And what I'm talking about here is this trap of an unprofessional attitude. And the solution to this is you stop being that negative person and focus on being more positive and focus on being more of an asset to the team rather than a liability. Now, I really think that we as church musicians and really just people overall like sameness. And what I mean by that is that we really tend to get comfortable with the way things are and we don't like change much. But the problem with that is that the things we want to gain and achieve are almost always on the other side of change. One of the things that I tell a lot of my coaching students is that you can't solve today's problems and issues with yesterday's solutions. But so many church musicians still do this. They like to stay the same. They don't like to change. And worst of all, because of this sameness, they start to think that their way is the best way and that they know everything, all because they fall into this trap of not being open to new ideas. And the way you deal with that is you start by fostering an environment of open-mindedness, and you encourage people to give input. And that open-minded environment will encourage you to be open to new ideas. So I talked earlier about church musicians trying to prove themselves and all of that. And that trap kind of falls under the umbrella of this trap that I'm about to discuss. And we all deal with it in one way or another. And it's because we live in a world now where we all have to work hard to gain and achieve what we want to achieve, and nobody gives us anything. And that really makes us focus a lot on getting and achieving the things we want without much focus on the people around us. And that bleeds over into all aspects of our lives, like the things we do and how we operate as church musicians. And there's probably a time to do that and focus on gaining stuff for yourself and all of that. But the problem is that so many church musicians focus on this too long and so long that they become self-centered and nobody wants to work with them. And they fall into this trap of being self-focused rather than team-focused. And what you got to remember is that Michael Jordan and LeBron James had teams they played on. So they had to have a team mindset to achieve what they wanted to achieve. And that's how you keep from falling into this trap. You realize and understand that the music department is a collaborative effort. Now, you got the 10 traps down, but there's another shocking truth about church musicians that you really should know, or getting these 10 traps down won't even matter. And I discuss it in this video right here. So head over and check it out right now.